But I was born in Korea, and at the age of 5, I immigrated to Canada. I remember not knowing a word of English, and my sister, older sister, and I would just pretend we were speaking English, but we were just doing gibberish. And it was just fun because I thought, this is so exciting. We got on a plane. I still remember the day I left Korea. My paternal grandmother said, there's no bathrooms on the plane, so you must go right now. And she kind of locked us in the bathroom all day long because she could not imagine that there were toilets up in the air. So I just remember that day getting all excited, not knowing why the whole family at the airport were crying and crying and crying that we were leaving. When I started school, I didn't know any word of English. I started kindergarten in the middle of the year. And because I didn't know any English, it took me a while for me to figure out that there was racism going on and that people were actually making fun of me. I didn't look like the rest of the kids at school. I certainly didn't dress like them, and I couldn't speak English at that point. So it was very difficult, and that was kind of my first encounter of racism. And how am I supposed to deal with this racism that's kind of right in your face? I remember growing up, and everybody would ask me, what are you? What are you? And I would say, I'm Korean. And they said, Korean? There's no such thing as Korean. They said, there's Japanese and there's Chinese, but there's no Korean. And then I went home thinking maybe I made it all up, that I wasn't Korean. And then I heard from other folks, and particularly if you grew up in the States, in the Pacific Rim or in Hawaii, this is the other thing that went around, that there were no Koreans, but if a Chinese married a Japanese, their kids were Korean. So I was like, who am I and what am I? That was a perpetual question throughout my childhood, and even today I kind of think about it. So the question of the foreigner. I talked a little bit about this at the breakfast meeting, and how Asian Americans, for some reason, of the different ethnic groups or the different marginalized groups or the different people of color, we are understood as foreigners or the perpetual foreigner. So when I look at the story of Madame Butterfly, maybe you've read it or you've watched the play or the opera. When we see this story, we see this young, fragile girl who falls in love with a white GI soldier, and they produce a child. He goes back into the U.S., forgets about her, marries a white woman, and there she is, waiting and waiting and waiting for him to come back, and he doesn't. And when he finally does, she realizes what has happened, blindfolds her little child, and commits suicide. When I think about this story, and the story of particularly Asian American women, we are kind of understood as a foreigner. And as a foreigner, we can be cast away. When we look at the book of Ezra, with the story of the foreign woman, when they came back from the exile, they were trying to rebuild themselves. And part of that rebuilding, they were wondering what to do with these foreign women. They were married, they had children. What happens to these foreign women? They get cast away. And I think in our society, if we continue to talk about Asian Americans particularly as the foreigner, it's easy for us to be cast away. I remember when I began teaching, and someone in the room had made a statement like this: We hire all these foreigners and look at all the problems that they bring. Sorry about that. So if you are understood as a foreigner, then we are the ones that bring the problem. If there's anything that happens, 9/11, it's the foreigners that cause the problem. Or it's easy to scapegoat somebody else as the problem. We see this during the elections. Someone else is always the problem, and it's usually those who are people of color.